welcome back to Why Is This a Podcast? I'm your host, Kieran Watt. So lovely to see you again, to speak with you again, um, and to bring you the expert insights of guests like my guest this episode, who is a long-time consultant in public policy and professional relations in the healthcare sector. And she joins me now from the Empire State of New York, the Big Apple itself, Lenore Cooney. Lenore, thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. I'm really, really happy to have you, because there's so much going on right now.
That's certainly true.
With politics, with policy, with health, the pandemic. Of course, my last guest was Dr. Joelle Calme.
Oh yes.
Where we talked about vaccines and whatnot. And I want to sort of get to kind of the substance of our conversation and the questions. But first of all, I just want to ask you, how are you? How has COVID-19, how has the pandemic treated you?
I am very well, came through very nicely, was an early vaccinee. So I've been protected since February. Worked on most of my family and persuaded the last holdout to get just last week to get his first.
How did you do it? How did you manage to get the last holdout?
It's my grandson, and I just pulled all the awful, guilt stops. So make grandma happy.
Was he held at gunpoint at any stage?
No, he just kept putting it off and putting it off. He didn't really have any philosophical or political objections to it. He just hadn't done it. So
how do you size up sort of, because you said that your grandson didn't have philosophical reasons why he wouldn't get the vaccine. How do you size up the people who do have those philosophical?
I guess I'm using philosophical loosely as a term. I think you have
ideological.
Yeah, you really can't separate out, I think, the opposition to certainly the COVID vaccine from everything else that's going on in the US as far as political standoffs between two sides. I mean, I think a lot of this is the denialism of the disease, and the anti-vaccine is coming from a fundamental anti-elitism, which is a result of, a lot of history. I wanted to point out there's an article this month, if people care to read it, in the Atlantic magazine by George Packer, and it's called "How America Fractured into Four Parts." And I think there are some consonants with things that are going on in Europe as well in terms of this sort of neo-populism, a lot of the same attitudes. But going back to the vaccines, it's this idea of I don't believe elites. I don't believe what they tell me. You can't. I believe in individual freedom. I control my body and my area, and I don't want to be. And I don't want to be you. I don't want to be one of them. So there's an us and them thing there too.
When I interviewed Dr. Calme, I did in jest. I will emphasize in jest. I did say to him, right, and how much does Bill Gates pay you? And because I've had my first shot. Mm-hmm. I'm waiting on my second at the time I'm taping this. After I had my first shot, I said to the lovely woman who administered it, I said, "Oh, lovely, good to know I've been microchipped." But I suppose people get. I'm sympathetic to them. I'm sympathetic to anti-vaxxers because, in terms of trusting the so-called elites, well, they've not given people a lot of reasons to trust them.
I guess so. Going back to COVID itself, I stayed in New York through last spring. I'll tell you, that was I mean, it certainly wasn't comparable to the Blitz, but
Mm.
it was harrowing. I mean, the sirens went 24 hours a day, and there were just trucks filled with bodies
Yeah.
in the street, refrigerator trucks. And New Yorkers are people in New York City are very compliant. They have not taken their masks off. They still wear them, certainly inside. And because we had this sort of, yes, but we had this very kind of, well, for us it was secondhand, but close experience with how awful this can be. And parts of the country which haven't had that, maybe with where the population has been less dense, haven't had that experience. You can see kind of why they may be more casual about it, or think it's a remote possibility. Right now, we're enjoying a wonderful interlude where we have very low infection rates,
Yeah.
and our vaccine rates aren't terrific, but they're rising. But we're really worried about the Delta variant a lot. And public health people are really, really worried about it, that sooner or later, certainly in under-vaccinated populations, or certain geographic areas, there's going to be there'll be some, if we don't get the vaccination rates up, unvaccinated will be at risk, and we all will be to a certain degree, although the vaccine may be enough to keep us out of the hospital.
Do you know what? It's an odd comparison to make, but where you mentioned sort of the less densely populated areas, because I'm not in a particularly densely populated area of Wales in the UK. I'm in I'm a Valleys boy, so have been pretty much all my life. The comparison that I make is pollution in India, where pollution is, you think of it and you think of the big cities, the mega cities in India. You think of Delhi, Mumbai, where pollution is of course a huge problem, but it doesn't actually take into account the fact that the majority of pollution related illness and or death actually occurs in rural India.
I didn't know that.
Has
that to do with cooks folks as well?
Yeah, indoor pollution. But I mean, COVID, it's similar in the sense that when they announced the nationwide lockdown, you had a lot of migrant workers who were sort of laboring in the cities going, well, we're going back to our villages now. How many of them may have carried the disease back, you don't know. And I just think that it's such a misconception to think of COVID-19 in such a narrow way, where you only think of it as a problem where you've got a lot of people. COVID-19 can get you everywhere.
That's true. In terms of the less dense populations, however, there's probably also less chatter. So there may be less acute awareness of the danger, where it's being talked about less. So that's another aspect of this. Also, wide swaths of the United States have no broadband, so people aren't plugged into computers and getting their information, good or bad, but at least it's COVID.
I was going to say then, because it's partly obviously about, can you get the information? It's always about what information or misinformation do you get.
I will say, actually, we have to, looking back over, we all, under the Trump administration, we kind of all know how kind of crazy that got with poor information, with Dr. Fauci valiantly trying to correct things that were coming out of the White House. But since that time, when the vaccine was being rolled out, it wasn't, no one was covered with glory on this one, including the CDC, which had new leadership by that time. They've made several communications missteps, which have confused some people, understandably so, and convinced others that, see, they don't know what they're talking about, and why should I listen to them? So that's been, that has continued to be a problem.
I
And so,
remember,
yeah, I'm not just talking about the people who manufacture the conspiracy theories and myths. I'm talking about regular old straight information. Hasn't been on as well as it might.
I remember when I remember watching an interview with Nigel Farage,
Yes.
where the interviewer, I think, I think it was Piers Morgan.
Oh,
I don't like agreeing.
that's a pair.
I don't like agreeing with Piers Morgan, but he was talking to Farage, and he mentioned Trump's comment about disinfectant
Yes.
and injection of disinfectant, and Farage was saying no, that's fake news. And I'm there sort of, I know Trump didn't directly say to people inject or ingest bleach, yourselves, but it said the point is
No,
people,
actually, he kind of did.
yeah, but
He
exactly,
talked about it as a
thought,
model. He didn't say he was doing it, but it was very strongly suggested, and I wouldn't blame anybody for taking away that meaning that
exactly,
might be a good thing
the
to
point,
do.
it's the point that people thought that that's what he was saying to do, like with the insurrection at the Capitol, people thought that he meant, break in. The fact that it's not the fact whether or not
Well,
Trump
we're good. That will be there will be a commission to investigate that. There's kind of two sides to that opinion and evidence on both sides.
and it's not the fact that it's not whether or not Trump is a racist, but racists think he's a racist.
Well, he has his genius actually is to sink into grievance and popular culture, and he's extremely good at it. So whether or not he actually believes that these are deeply held beliefs of his, he certainly knows how to project them onto a population and get them rallied around opposition to. So he's used race that way. I don't know if I can say whether he is or is not a racist himself.
I do think that at a certain point, if the racists think that you're on their side, it actually, I think, ceases to matter. Personally, that's what I personally think.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's race has become sort of the signal manifestation of this, but it's not the only one.
Yeah.
There's a kind of nationalism, a militancy,
Populism.
Yeah, and they kind of all go together. He has fixed on. I mean, he goes after the generals aren't sort of macho enough. Things like, and he goes after these very sort of popular. I don't want to use the word primitive because it sounds condescending, but they're very elemental areas. The other immigrants, people of color, anything that might be a threat, and he's very good at sinking into both distrust and fear.
He's got his shtick. He's got his shtick.
Yes, he's brilliant at it. He's absolutely brilliant.
I think that Donald Trump is an absolutely masterful politician.
Yes, he is. I think in a way that surprised him as well.
in the sense that he's a good campaigner. He was a terrible president, but an absolutely brilliant.
No, that's what I said. To a certain segment of the population, which is approximately, my husband and I argue about this all the time about what it is. It's about a third.
The same. I mean, it's the same with, and I hate to say it, Boris Johnson. Johnson's great. He's a terrible prime minister, but he's a great politician.
That's right.
Whereas I think of somebody, say Jimmy Carter, good, a good, decent man, but not a very, very good.
It's the demagoguery that where Trump excels, and that has everyone very worried.
I've always I liken Donald Trump to a cobra, personally, in that he's full of venom. I wouldn't leave him alone in a room with a woman that I love. And if I unexpectedly found him in my house, I'd be very, very worried.
We did unexpectedly find him in our house.
Well, you did. Yeah, well, exactly. To turn from one president to another, you've got a new guy in charge, Joe Biden. How are you rating Biden at the moment?
Well, I think for his first 100+ days, he surprised people. Probably people.
Surprised me. He
Yeah,
surprised me.
and he came. I think he was voted in as a moderate, sort of middle ground. Everybody, and even people who were farther left and wanted, somebody more on the progressive side, said, "Okay, we just need somebody else, and somebody.
We just need to get rid of Trump.
Somebody grown up, somebody sane." And actually, he has surprised people. I mean, he's done a good bit, certainly a good bit on the health side. And the international side. I mean, one of the earliest actions he took was to reinstate U.S. contributions to the WHO,
Paris Agreement,
the Paris Climate Accord, and I think at the G7, at least in his demeanor, he calmed some nerves as to what was necessary.
And he made a substantial commitment to COVAX as well.
He did, and also the recovery bill, which is almost kind of an omnibus bill. It contains a lot, and it actually contains one. There's a child tax credit in this, which under a certain income, people will receive $300 a month per child in cash. It will make an enormous difference in terms of, it won't solve our inequity and inequality problem, but it will really contribute to narrowing it. We had a victory in the Supreme Court with the Affordable Care Act. This may be the last Supreme Court hearing on this, and it's finally here. And he also has, which is not, if you're on the policy side and watching this carefully, you might see this on our Medicare, our our safety net is in tatters. So the child tax act was one, but he's also on our Medicaid program, which is healthcare for low-income people. He has really started to broaden that. He's looking at. He now includes new mothers for up to a year after birth. He's looking at prison inmates who get nothing. He's looking at, and we have a lot of them in the United States. He's looking at undocumented immigrants. And he's also looking at adding food and housing as services to that, which, not nearly enough to address the social determinants of health, which is why people get sick to begin with. So in a few months, he's done a great deal in the health area. So I think, and the COVID response was, he inherited a bit of a mess. It was a mess for a couple of months.
I was going to say a bit of a mess strikes me as an understatement.
Yes. Well, the way the whole thing, the way the vaccine, this is a big country. And the way the vaccine was delivered was the military dropped these huge, just did drops. And it was up to every state had a different plan as to how they were going to do it. And they didn't do it especially well at the beginning. They finally got onto it, and it's finally okay now once it sort of moved down into where people get it in pharmacies. But for a while, it was quite disorderly.
If I can ask, was Biden your guy during the primaries? Was he your? Was he the one that you?
I was sort of by default. I didn't think Bernie Sanders, who I think has a lot of good thinking. I don't think his policies are saleable in the U.S. at this point. So I didn't want to have a very left-wing guy against Donald Trump, because it just reinforced the dichotomy, and I thought Sanders would probably lose. So I was for Biden on that basis.
None of the other candidates.
No, nobody rang any big bells. I thought Biden, well, and it was sort of, everybody said, well, Biden, okay, we know who he is, we know what he'll do, and it's better than this. So early on, he's exceeded expectations, I think.
He's certainly gone in a direction that I didn't expect him to.
Yes, right.
I certainly didn't think he would be as progressive.
No, he is, and he will be on certain sides. There's certain areas where remains to be seen. We have a huge we have concomitant police problem and a rising crime problem, although the crime tends to be restricted to gun violence. If you could look at that's a bright side. Overall crime rates are still down and going down. This gun violence is a problem, and it's racially connected. So, and that makes the whole thing. It's another nasty stew.
So just to be clear, you don't miss the last guy.
I don't think anybody does. My dentist was saying how many people he had seen with cracked teeth from tooth grinding. So it's been good for his business.
Well, before I just go on, because obviously I want to let you go in just a few moments. Before we go on to, because I do want to ask you about sexual and reproductive health, but I do just want to turn to New York politics, because of course you've had a mayoral election in New York City, and you've a gubernatorial election next year. I just was wondering, what are your thoughts there?
Well, New York City, everybody has their own idea of New York City. It's coming back. It's reblooming. And it sometimes does what it wants to do, regardless of who's at the helm. It would be great. We have enormous housing problems. We have miles and miles of very tall buildings that are empty. Offices. It remains to be seen if workers are coming back into the office, or to what degree. So our choices were kind of, we had ranked voting this time. So you had to fill out 10, you had to fill in 10 names in the rank order of your preference. So we sort of had Andrew Yang sort of imploded early on
he's dropped out, hasn't he?
Well, he still ran.
He conceded. He conceded.
Yeah. Well, see, nobody's because it ranked voting. You just have preferences. We don't have a winner yet.
Right. Well, not at the time of recording.
So there are top 3 who emerged from the ranked voting. Eric Adams, who was a former borough president of Brooklyn, which is kind of an honorific, practically has really no power, and a former police captain. He's black. And then 2 women, one Maya Wiley, who's a black woman and is an academic and is very progressive. And a third, Catherine Garcia, who's the former sanitation commissioner, who's a technocrat. She knows how to run a city. She knows how to do this. She's sort of solid down the middle. No really big ideas, but probably knows how to get things done. So they're the 3 choices. Right now, it looks like Adams will probably win. He ran a very, very good campaign, an excellent campaign. I think he surprised people with the skill with which he did that. He put a lot of coalitions together, and it showed.
Are you glad to see the back of de Blasio?
No, I was a fan of de Blasio for a long time, knew him a bit. And I don't know, I think the book is yet to be written about what happened to this. That first thing about when and I have spoken to people that I thought were on the liberal side, and who say they don't. I was so curious to why they didn't like de Blasio. And one said it was that he did a PSA in his first campaign, and his son was in it, who was 16 at the time, who's mixed race child, and he talked about having to tell his son about how to behave with the police so that the police didn't shoot him, and it created all kinds of outrage, and the police really turned against de Blasio. And how is this? They went after his daughter and doxed her. I don't know whether you know what doxing is.
Yeah, yeah, it's sort
And
of
yes, you reveal all their
yeah.
information online, which is never done with a rate. And she was arrested as a protester. It wasn't anything specific. And I have a feeling De Blasio just went quiet, backed off, and I think he was afraid of the police. We have a very we have two police unions in New York who are, I mean, we're sort of worried about putting this online.
I know you miss.
But they're very aggressive.
I know you. Well, I mean, I'm in the UK, so I'm fine. Um, I take it you don't miss Giuliani.
No, I never did actually. I mean, have a mayor for all those years who gets up every morning and looks for somebody to pick a fight with. I was
To just keeping De Blasio's name in the air, so to speak, for a moment. Do you think he's going to challenge Andrew Cuomo next year?
no, I don't.
Do you think that Cuomo will be defeated?
It depends on who. He's been there long enough, and while he had a moment of glory, and he was wonderful during that when he did that daily broadcast on COVID. I mean, I know I had friends in California.
Whatever an award, didn't he? Won
Yes, he did. He won an
an Emmy or a
I have
Peabody.
friends in California who tuned in every morning to see it because he was so, and it was in terms of communications lessons, it was just speaking straight to people in a calm tone of voice, exhorting to the degree and acknowledging he was exhorting. But he was brilliant.
As a counterpoint to sort of the guy, the White House.
Yes.
I understand why.
But then Andrew went back to being Nasty Andy.
He went back to being Andrew Cuomo, basically.
Yes, he did. Yes. So, and there's been tons of bad press, both on the sexual harassment side, on bullying offices, and it just so I don't know it, and it really, I would guess, I don't think he has Republican opposition. I don't know who would challenge him.
If a Republican, if Cuomo prevails in the primaries, do you think a Republican could unseat him?
Again, it depends on the Republican, but I tend to think in New York State, there's not enough personality power on the Republican side to do that.
I look forward to I look forward to the fourth term of President Cuomo. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you one last thing, because we were talking before we started the taping about sexual and reproductive health, which I know is an area that you've worked in during your career of, I think, 30 plus years.
Yes, something like that.
And you mentioned about syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia and other sexually transmitted diseases, which you see as sort of being quite a big problem right now. I was just wondering if you could shed some insight into that.
I think it's caught public health by surprise a little bit. If you think about the dynamics of what's been going on, it probably makes more sense. There is a huge upsurge in street drug taking in this country. A lot of the clinics that administered methadone have been hampered in delivering their services during lockdowns and restrictions. And it is now, whenever you have a lot of street drug taking, you have a lot of sex for drugs activity. Mm-hmm. So obviously this is not protected. There's also there's a big rise in heroin, and that's that uses needles, and that's not necessarily clean needles. So there's diseases that are being transmitted that way as well, sexually transmitted and other. And so we're now seeing huge rises in chlamydia, in drug-resistant gonorrhea, and also really disturbingly in syphilis, which was really at a very low level before COVID began, and now is quite high. And now they're seeing vertical transmission, that is between mother and infant, where the infant contracts the syphilis during the birth process. So that's very disturbing and very upsetting. And there doesn't seem to be right now a very organized way of addressing this. It tends to be among the homeless population has soared during the epidemic, and the programs to address that have been diverted, I guess, because of concentration in other areas. So it really is, a legacy of COVID that was probably could have been foreseen if you thought about everything, but is sort of now, a problem in and of itself.
Is it insurmountable?
I don't know. If I would assume not. We have, we've done it before. And I mean, certainly we saw how well contact tracing worked in COVID in this country, which was not at all. Contact tracing.
When it comes to contact tracing, you're kind of rubbing it in a bit for somebody in the UK, given the failure that we had with test and trace.
True. But I mean, contact tracing, is a time-honored and a very effective way of dealing with sexually transmitted disease. It's been always the way it's been done. The CDC and public health was very good at it for a long time, but a lot of those mechanisms have been underfunded and underused. So now we'll have to probably re-resurrect it to try to get these rates down.
Well, I hope that there's success in that field. And I really hope that people see our interaction and hear your fascinating insights into the issues that we've talked about, politics in the US, in New York, and of course, sexual and reproductive health. Lenore, thank you so much for coming on.
This is fun. Thank you.
It's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. Of course, it's not the first time we've spoken. We've been on other podcasts together. I think this is the first time they've interviewed you one-on-one.
I believe so. Yeah.
And it's the first
time ably as a group. Yeah.
And the first time for this program as well. It's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks for your time. Take care and stay safe. Give my best to your loved ones, and I'll also just take this opportunity to give my love to your loved ones who are watching this, and to the people not watching it. I'm a big enough person to give my love to your loved ones too. Consider liking and subscribing. Take care, everybody. From Why Is This a Podcast? I'm Kieran Watts. Thanks, Jack, my researcher, James, my editor. Thanks, Lenore, my guest, and thank you for watching. Take care. Goodbye.